You're watching Euronews now. I'm Takumbo Salako with your top stories. NATO foreign ministers and EU ambassadors are meeting again to discuss taking tougher action against Russia over its war in Ukraine. We'll have the latest from Brussels. We'll also look at Moscow's military maneuvers after the alliance warned that Russia is now concentrating its war efforts on eastern and southern Ukraine. And the great-granddaughter of Leo Tolstoy tells us what she thinks the Russian literary giant would have made of the war. NATO foreign ministers and EU ambassadors are holding separate meetings today to consider imposing tougher measures against Moscow. It comes after the alliance warned that Russia is stepping up its attacks in the Donbas region, and the EU Commission proposed a ban on Russian coal imports. Well, let's go to Brussels now and talk to our correspondent, Maeve McMahon. Maeve, good to see you there. Ukraine is continuing to claim that Russia is committing more and more atrocities. We know the United States is considering more sanctions. What is on the table for NATO foreign ministers?
The NATO foreign ministers will be meeting today. Secretary of State from the United States, Antony Blinken, has already arrived in Brussels last night. It's feeling a little bit like his second home. He's been so much here in the last couple of weeks. He'll be sitting down with his counterparts. He'll be joined as well for a separate meeting with the Ukrainian Foreign Minister Kuleba. They'll also be inviting non-NATO members into that meeting, like Finland, like Sweden, like Georgia, in order to find a response, of course, to what's going on. The fact of the matter, though, today's meeting is not an extraordinary meeting, so don't expect any major announcements. Today's NATO meeting was a lot about preparing for their big summit this June taking place in Madrid. That said, the atrocities that we saw last weekend unfold in Bucha could change the tone of that meeting today, and one US official yesterday told me that leaders and NATO allies will be compelled to take a look at what both collectively and individually they can do, what more they can do to support Ukraine in their hour of need.
Maybe we know that EU ambassadors are also meeting later. What are they hoping to achieve? And we can see those people around you who've been protesting. What is it they want to come out from that meeting?
Absolutely. EU ambassadors have been meeting since this morning, Tokes, and the protesters here represent the Ukrainian civil society here in Brussels who've been taking to the streets since the 24th of February. I met them already back on the 24th of February when the invasion took place, and they said they greeted those ambassadors this morning and made sure that their message was taken into that room. Because what will be happening in that room today is the EU ambassadors, the 27 of them, will be trying to put into theory the big bazooka announcement of the European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen yesterday in Strasbourg. You might have noticed she announced a big fifth set of sanctions against Russia, focusing as well on that proposal about an EU-wide ban on coal imports from Russia. We've already heard from one ambassador this morning. They told us it would be a long meeting, it would be a difficult meeting, because of course that's a very tricky issue for EU ambassadors to agree on. If you think of last year, according to Bruegel, the think tank, the European Union imported 70% of thermal coal from Russia. That's the coal needed in order to generate electricity. And you've countries like Poland, like Germany and the Netherlands who are highly reliant on these imports. And many, of course, increased the amount of coal imports in order to counter for the fact that gas prices have been spiking. So expect a long meeting, difficult conversations around that table. But you'll be sure that the protesters behind me will be still waiting outside tonight when that meeting comes to an end.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy has called for a war crimes tribunal like the one established at Nuremberg after World War II. In an emotional address to the United Nations Security Council, the Ukrainian leader accused Russian forces of carrying out gruesome atrocities and called for them and their leaders to be brought to justice.
I'm addressing you on behalf of the people who honor the memory of the deceased every single day. I'm addressing you in the memory of the civilians who died, who were shot and killed in the back of their head after being tortured. Some of them were shot on the streets. Others were thrown into wells. So they died there in their suffering. They were killed in their apartments and houses, blown up by grenades. The civilians were crushed by tanks while sitting in their cars in the middle of the road.
Piles of burned bodies are among the latest horrors to emerge from the town of Bucha following the Russian troop pullout. Moscow continues to call the images fake, while Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov accused the West of trying to derail peace talks by fueling hysteria.
In the recent days, the propaganda machine of the West and Ukraine has been working exclusively to fuel hysteria around these videos, which were filmed, as we understand it, by the Ukrainian military and the Ukrainian security service in the city of Bucha. The question is, what is the motive behind this openly false provocation, which cannot be justified? We are inclined to think that the reason is to find a pretext to break down the ongoing talks at the very moment when we see the light, although weak.
Ukraine alleges war crimes are being committed in numerous towns. Scores of civilians are feared buried beneath a shelled apartment block in Borodyanka near Kyiv.
Hundreds of Ukrainians try to board trains, leaving their town of Kramatorsk fearing a Russian troop advance towards them. Moscow says it's now focusing on what it calls the liberation of Ukraine's eastern Donbas region. In the days ahead, fighting is expected to be fierce. Ukrainian forces are bracing themselves for the anticipated Russian offensive. Donbas includes Luhansk and Donetsk regions, where Russian-backed separatists control a significant portion of the area since 2014. NATO expects Moscow to try to take the entire Donbas and to create a land bridge to occupied Crimea.
NATO's task is to provide support to Ukraine, and we do so with modern military equipment, financial military support, and also humanitarian support. We know that there is a very close link between what they can achieve at the negotiating table and their strength on the battlefield.
On Tuesday, Kramatorsk city centre was hit by Russian strikes, leaving a large smouldering crater next to a damaged school building. Kramatorsk has largely been spared destruction witnessed by other Ukraine cities.
In this quiet district of Mykolaiv, it has been more than 1 month since anyone who has decided to stay has had a quiet day. In times of war, the targets are usually military, but in this one, initiated by Russia, the rules are not the same.
The Russians use illegal cluster bombs. The bomb is blowing up in the skies, and then it's shelling with the small cluster bombs with the small pieces of metal, which kills people in a big range.
Dmitry was within range of another Russian attack. At the age of 32, and after having managed to take his wife and 2 children to Poland, he had one of the biggest scares of his life.
It was 7 a.m. when it all started. First there were explosions. The house was shaking. My first reaction was to look out of the window, but I realized that when the window started shaking, the attack was very close. There were 6 explosions at the front of the house. There were parts of shells lying all around, and also in the backyard. And when I looked out of the window, people were already lying on the ground. Cars were smashed. Shell parts were everywhere.
In just the last few days, 1 hospital, an orphanage, 11 kindergartens and 12 schools have been attacked in Mykolaiv. Most of the cluster bombs that hit the city came from Kherson, a region controlled by Russian troops.
It's hard to predict what will be the next. For sure, we see that they are regrouping. They fell back a little. They regrouping. They get more troops from Crimea. They gather it in Kherson area, in Kherson region. So we expect that they will attack us in the next few days.
And you are ready to answer to that attack?
We were born ready. So for sure, we are ready to hit them.
The advanced line of Putin troops is now 30 kilometers from the center of the city. Sérgio Ferreira de Almeida in Mykolaiv, Ukraine, for Euronews.
It's time for us to take a break here on Euronews Now. We'll be back in a few moments.